Thank you. I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm standing in support of the Taxation, Kiwisaver, Homestart and Remedial Matters Bill. One of the reasons we are supporting this, Mr Speaker, is the officials said this would have no impact. So it's not negative, but it's just not going to do anything. But, Mr Speaker, I suppose one of the things that that's been interesting for this debate for me is not so much what's in this bill, but the attitude of the government members to housing and to this bill in particular. But I just want to start off by saying that this bill is one of these ones, it's shoddy legislation, Mr Speaker, and it's all about style over substance. There aren't 90,000 Kiwis going to benefit from this, Mr Speaker. The officials said there were going to be a couple of hundred. But this is one of those bills that's out there and it's trumpeted 90,000 Kiwis. That is not the reality. And let me give you a couple of examples, Mr Speaker. Mr Smith, Nick Smith, stood up in the first speech and he said what this will allow Kiwis to do is if they're coming home, so they get the Homestart package, they can get their Kiwisaver stuff and they get access to about $50,000. Well, Mr Speaker, that example was actually a little disingenuous because if you've been away for 6 or 7 years, the odds of you putting money into Kiwisaver are remote. But let's say Nick Smith is right. And let's say you have come home to buy your first house and you've got $50,000 in your back pocket because of this piece of legislation and because of the welcome home payment and this sort of kind. Mr Smith said it will allow Kiwis to get into houses in Auckland. He said it will allow Kiwis to be able to afford a $500,000 house. Well, Mr Speaker, to be able to afford a $500,000 house, you have to have a deposit of $50,000, so you've got to pay off $450,000 worth of debt. Mr Speaker, to do that, at today's rates, it's $743 a week you're going to be paying off. $743 a week. And the banks like to have a ratio of around about 30% of your disposable income is going towards paying off your mortgage. They allow a little bit higher, but that's the ratio that they're really comfortable with. Well, to do that, Mr Speaker, you've got to have a household income of $173,000 to afford a mortgage of $450,000. And Nick Smith has the audacity to say, this is going to be great for Kiwis who are just coming home, they can buy this house, and they've got a household income of $173,000. Mr Speaker, I don't think that's particularly realistic at all. In fact, they're more than likely on the average wage to be able to afford something around about $175,000 mortgage if they are on the average wage of about $60,000. So the arguments over there just show how much this government is out of touch. Now, I don't want to throw numbers because people get confused, but there are a couple of points that Jamie Lee Ross made which are just astounding, Mr Speaker. Jamie Lee Ross, an Auckland MP, actually said, and I quote, "I am sick to death of hearing about the housing market. I am sick to death of hearing about how high-priced housing market." Well, Mr Speaker, I would suggest a whole lot of people that live in the city he purports to represent, let alone all over the country, are sick to death of not being able to even come close to affording a house. Mr Speaker, for a whole lot of Kiwis now, a generation of Kiwis, home ownership is now, the dream is gone. Home ownership is not available. So, Jamie Lee Ross, what I say to you, instead of saying to people that come to you and say, I don't want to hear about the housing market, how about having a little bit of sympathy? How about having a little bit of sympathy and saying, I hear where you're coming from. How about we sit down and work out a solution? Because the thing for me is Jamie Lee Ross said, and this is a man who in his maiden speech said that Maggie Thatcher was his political idol. This is the man that said the market has the solution. And that highlights the absolute philosophical difference between Labor and National. National believes that the market has the solution. Labor believes that the markets are imperfect a lot of the time, and in a country the size of New Zealand, the government has a role to protect the interests and the identities and the well-being of good, hard-working Kiwis. That is the difference. And Mr Speaker, I would argue in Auckland, the market has failed. And the reason I say that is because house prices have gone up at such a rate that home ownership is now unaffordable for a lot of Kiwis. And in fact, Mr Bennett inadvertently played right into our hands, because he said under Labor, house prices had gone up in 9 years 96%, but under National have gone up 28%. Well, Mr Speaker, you know the reason why this is, because under Labor for 9 years the provinces boomed. And so what you had is house inflation over the whole country, because people had jobs in the provinces, there were opportunities in the provinces, and people bought houses and they moved there. Well, Mr Speaker, I know, you probably know yourself, Mr Speaker, that in the provinces there has not been house inflation, there's been house deflation. This is a government, Mr Speaker, that has actually forgotten the provinces, and Alistair Scott got it dead right. He said, in order to go to the provinces, you've got to create jobs and opportunities. And that is exactly what Labor believes, exactly what Labor believes. But what has happened is even the President of local government New Zealand, who is a national supporter, he's no longer a national member, has said before the last election that this government does not have a plan for the regions. And that's a damning indictment. But it makes me smile when I hear these guys say, it's the market, it's the market. The market has failed. Mr Speaker, in Australia they introduced something like this. What they did for first home buyers is they gave first home buyers $20,000. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? The immediate thing that happened is house prices increased by $20,000. The market prices this sort of stuff in, and this is what the officials said. In fact, when we asked the officials, have you done any modelling on this? They looked a little sheepish and they said, no, we haven't. And we said, well, what do you mean you haven't done any modelling? And Mr Scott will back me up on this, and they said, well, we haven't done any modelling. And Mr Cosgrove said, well, have you talked to the different agencies? Do you know the benefit? And they said, well, tentatively positive. Tentatively positive, I think, will be the quote that goes down in for the FEC. It's absolutely tentatively positive. Now, Mr Speaker, for me, if we're going to do something like this, then it has to be a little bit more than tentatively positive. It's got to be absolutely stunning, because this is about substance, and this is what Kiwis want to see. They want to see solutions. They want to see solutions, not window dressing. And Mr Speaker, I think this is absolute window speaking. A couple of things that Mr Scott said. He talked about if a capital gains comes in, you know, there are arguments for and against capital gains, but if a capital gains come in, it will force people to buy bigger houses. It's called the mansion effect, and it's been completely discounted. I just want to put that on the table. We do want to see a register of foreign buyers. I just thought I'd better address that. I just think all Kiwis deserve the right to know who is investing in their country. And I back that 110%, and I would love to see this. It's not saying we don't allow foreign investment in at all, because Labor believes that foreign investment is absolutely vital to growing a strong economy. But what we do want to know is who is investing and where they are investing. That is all. It is about to go ahead in Australia and a lot of other countries. But, Mr Speaker, there is something else I would like to mention that hasn't been talked about, just for the last 2 minutes. And this is about the veteran income replacement payments, because this bill is not just about the, getting your money out of Kiwisaver and buying a house. There is some stuff here about veterans. And there was a member of the Defence Force who was in the Select Committee the whole time. And we tended to concentrate on the Kiwisaver stuff, but this is just as important as well. And what I would urge RSAs and veterans representatives is to understand the bill and go out and consult. And I did ask a question of one of the Defence Force staff when I read this, and I said, hold a second here. This isn't as clear as it seems. And what this particular woman did say was, what we have in RSA is veterans advisors that are very good at consulting, letting veterans know about changes in legislation. But this isn't quite clear cut, Mr Speaker, because what this is about, and it's about, there are changes made to payments under Veteran Support Act, and they're going to be treated in the same way as ACC earnings related compensation. What that means is that this has implications for veterans who have student loans and child support payments, and also and it's going to increase those obligations, but it is also going to decrease the working for families entitlements for veterans. So what I would urge, Mr Speaker, every representative from every RSA around the country is understand the legislation, put it down in plain English in all your newsletters that go out to veterans, and I would urge veterans to sit down and understand the implications of this, because it's not quite as clear as I initially thought when it was going through the Select Committee. It wasn't until we actually sat down and said, oh, I now see. So I urge all veterans and Veterans Affairs peoples to understand it and communicate that well to their constituents. Thank you very much.
I call Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.